channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to TTR on this. Well, is it sunny in the UK? I don't live in the UK. Somebody told me it was. And in fact, we've got a multinational audience this evening as well, joining us from the USA and France and the UK. And so I don't know what the weather's like in the UK right now. Someone told me it's better. I don't know. Here, where I am in Galicia, it's actually raining and grey. So, you know, I'm not saying I regret not being in the UK, but the weather is grey here. I promise you. I just want to welcome everybody who's watching this, whether you're watching this right now or you've clicked play and you're watching this back. Thank you very much for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio. It is always a pleasure to have your company as we discuss more of the topics that matters to you, the teachers out there. And I think tonight I'm quite excited about what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about classroom discussion, which I think is a topic that in many cases, maybe it's sometimes a bit overlooked sometimes in terms of how it works, how we can enhance it, how we can make it better, how we can make it better for the teacher and the students. So I'm really looking forward tonight to digging into it in detail with three expert guests. So that's going to be absolutely brilliant. Just before we dig into that, obviously it's been a big week at TTR Towers because last weekend we had TTR Connect. So I just want to give a massive shout out to everybody who came down to Manchester for TTR Connect. It was absolutely brilliant. We had 250 teachers in Manchester. It was a fantastic atmosphere, brilliant speakers, amazing collaborative effort from everybody involved, including the organisers. Was absolutely fantastic. So just a big shout out and thanks to everybody who was involved in that event from start to finish, particularly the organizers who helped to make it happen. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Now, as we go through it, you're going to hear a little bit more about Kialo Edu. Kialo, as you're going to find out as we move through the show, is a fantastic free tool that can help your students to get more involved in conversations and debates and arguments in class in a very constructive way. And I can't wait actually to share and to explore what this platform can actually do for your students.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo Edu, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
Sweet. Now, actually, as I mentioned earlier, I've got three guests here from all over the place. Let me introduce them. We've got Ian, who's a former English teacher turned partnerships coordinator for Kialo Edu, where he works to make critical thinking education both engaging and accessible. And Ian is joining us all the way from Nashville, Tennessee. Ian, Nashville, Tennessee. How is it over there? Is it really hot? You're on mute, Ian.
Not yet. We're still at that nice part of the season, where the flowers are starting to come out, the trees are budding, and it's tornado season. So yeah,
Really?
yeah, we do that before it gets
I have,
before the
I
summer
have to
hits.
say that Nashville is one of the places that I want to visit. It's on my list of my top 5 places I want to visit. Now, you're probably going to tell me there's nothing there and it's boring now. And you're going to
No,
like
not at
burst my
all.
bubble.
This is an amazing place to visit. Absolutely, you're going to have very few cultural experiences in the United States that are quite as singular as what we have here in Nashville. We're called Music City for a reason, so you
Yeah.
can find something to suit. Don't worry.
That's my main thing. Like country music. That's why I'm keen on it. Is all that stuff. We also have Louise. Louise is an experienced teacher who's now using her curriculum knowledge in her role as Education Resources Associate at Kialo. And Louise, you are busy spreading the word about Kialo in the UK. How's that going? I mean, it
It's
must be
going
quite easy given that it's a free tool and it's amazing, right?
absolutely, and that's what we're trying to get out to teachers over here in the UK. It is completely free, and it makes such a difference to classroom discussions. And it's a real pleasure to show teachers the platform, and then to get their responses, and then to see how they're using it in class.
Brilliant. And Ruth, you're a experienced teacher of 15 years. You've got experience managing teams in RE and citizenship, PSHE, and you currently support schools with remote revision sessions, resource creation, and you teach a lot online. And you're also based in France.
Yes, so I moved to France 2 years ago, and I've been working remotely because you can't be an RE teacher in France, but also because I love working with the schools I work with in the UK. And so a lot of the work I do now is remote, but I also plan work for teachers to do. So I kind of bring in bits of Kialo and lots of things to do with classroom discussion in all those subjects that are mine. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And Ruth, I wanted to a quick question about France. I mean, without be as specific as you want, but what part of France are you in?
I am kind of near Toulouse, near Andorra.
Oh, yeah?
So people kind of sometimes know Andorra, so we're there kind of sort of near the mountains. Yeah. And yes, it's nice. Yeah. So we've also got rain, thunderstorm today. It's not gloriously sunny, which sometimes it is.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Well, let's kick off this conversation. And the first thing I'm going to say is to Ian is congratulations on Kialo winning at the Bet Awards. That's great. Tell me about it.
We're really proud of getting that award. It was the culmination of a lot of work by a lot of people on our team to make sure that we were presenting our best face, but also presenting the very best version of our product. We take our user experience so seriously. We're here for you and for your students as a completely free tool. We have nothing else to strive for. So we were really lucky that the fine folks at Bet were able to recognize everything that we've put into it. And we're so grateful to them for helping us amplify the message and the reach of Kialo as a result.
That's brilliant. That's epic. So I mean, the Bet Awards, were you actually at the awards?
No, they didn't fly me in from the States to go to the Bet Awards. Although our CEO and founder, Erikos Pitsos, he did go to the awards and accept that in person.
Because, Louise, were you there? Was anyone there?
No, just our founder. No, I'm only an hour and a half away from London, but no, I didn't make it either. But Erikos was there.
Yeah, the reason I was asking that, I just wanted to know. I've never been, so I've been at that show. We were at the Bat Show, actually. So I've been there, but I just always wanted to know what happens at the Bat Awards, like how much free champagne there is, how it's very exclusive. Like you can't get in there unless you've either won an award or you've got an invite. So invite
I think
me.
what happens at the Bet Awards stays at the Bet Awards, maybe.
Yeah,
probably. So okay, now Kialo, the name Kialo, Ian. Can you explain to us the name Kialo?
This is such a great question. Oftentimes, the first question that we get whenever I'm at a conference or something is, how do you say that? And yes, we are Kialo, and it's not a word you would have ever encountered before unless you're a very particular kind of language enthusiast, because Kialo is a word in Esperanto. Esperanto, if you're not familiar, is the project of this linguist back in the 19th century. His name was L. Zamenhof, and he wanted to create a universal language that everybody could speak, so everybody could talk to each other, in the hopes that we could foster world peace and understanding. So, like Esperanto itself, Kialo is founded in a very hopeful, very optimistic project. And Kialo means reason or cause, because our platform is all about getting students to explain the reason for what they think. It fits really well with what we do, because we're really asking students to move beyond that point in class discussions where they're just saying, here's what I think, but really getting into the why they think it. So we built this platform about rational, evidence-based discussions.
Yeah, well, I was going to just mention, and anyone else feel free to jump in. I think this is critical at the moment, isn't it? I think we're you know, you only have to look on the news for 5 minutes to understand that we're living in a world with lots and lots of opinions being amplified. It's very difficult for students to navigate the space, if you like, that contains those opinions, to not be bombarded, to not just go along with things, to be able to have their say. And it's exactly the same in the classroom. You know, that probably now, and we actually talked about this the other week on Teachers Talk Radio, it's probably more so now a minefield for teachers than it's ever been when it comes to classroom discussion. You know, there are more things to discuss, and there are more opportunities, but also challenges within that classroom discussion space. So I wanted to ask you, when it comes to, I mean, you mentioned that Kialo sort of complements the work that teachers do, and you know, it's a tool in a repertoire, isn't it? But Ian, can you sort of, you've touched on this already, but what is it that Kialo does? What is Kialo?
So, Kialo is an online platform for classroom discussions. So the way that it works is it's a very visual platform. Normally I have a little iPad here where I can show you everything I'm talking about, but I will just try and be very precise with my language here to give you a picture in your mind of how Kialo Edu works. And of course, you can always go to our website as well and check out an example discussion and follow along. So the way that discussions on Kialo work is it starts with some kind of question. So, for example, you could ask the question, do smartphones make us less smart? And then, from that question, a teacher would give the students some kind of central proposition to discuss. So you could take a side like, smartphones make us less smart, is that proposition. Then, students can either agree or disagree with that proposition by adding pros or cons. There we go. Yeah, we got a nice little visual. Thank you very much for that. And so once they add those pros and cons, you know, you might imagine Louise here might support this thesis by saying smartphones make us lazy because they make everything too easy. And Ruth might say, oh, well, no, smartphones can help us with lots of different tasks related to learning. So simple so far, right? But where it gets really interesting is that each one of these pros and cons that you see right there can then have its own pros or cons right below it. So I can write my own pro beneath Louise's pro, offering some support for why I think she's right. Or conversely, I could write a con to call Louise's claim into question. I can do the same thing for Ruth's claims by supporting or challenge it, and I can do the same thing for anybody's claims within the discussion. So once I've added my thoughts, then other people in the discussion can go beneath my claims and add their own pros and cons. So as you're adding these layers of either supporting or challenging the arguments, it creates this branching map of everybody's contributions. And that's what you see up there at the top, that kind of dialed out what we call a sunburst view of the map. So students can really see how all of their thoughts are stacking. They can visualize how their ideas are connected and how their arguments are being logically developed. So altogether, this is what we mean by saying it's asking students to say why they think what they think. Kialo is prompting students to dig much deeper into their reasoning and just moving beyond the what to the why, which can be really useful compared to class discussions, where you might just stay on that surface level without that extra prompting.
Can I ask
Altogether, yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of come in because I like that as an overview of what we're talking about here. But let's sort of zoom out a little bit there, and let's imagine you're a teacher who just does lots of classroom discussions. You know, how might that help with the challenges that they're facing? You know, trying to do those discussions in class. You know, how does this complement it? How does this support those challenges? How does this make it better for them and the students?
Well, there are lots of challenges that you might encounter when you're doing class discussions. Now, I will say, as a teacher, when I was in the classroom, I love live classroom discussions. There's something about just actually being able to hear students' voices, which is great. But you do have some issues where students may not be able to participate as fully or as equitably in the discussion as you may like. So for instance, we're all familiar with the problem of the shy student who, has got good stuff to say if only they could work up the gumption to say it publicly in front of their peers. So a discussion tool like Kialo, which is text-based, can really take away those fears of public speaking. Some students, have thoughts and they're willing to contribute them, but they need some time to assemble that before they actually start talking in a discussion. And sometimes the discussion can move on before they're able to contribute that, which can make it really awkward and frustrating for them. On Kialo, all the points are just evergreen. They're just sitting there and writing. You can respond to them whenever you like. And even for students who are really good at contributing in class discussions, you may find topics where they're reticent to say what they think because they may be afraid of being judged by their peers. And the benefit of an online platform like Kialo is that we offer an anonymous participation mode where students can skip through that fear of peer judgment because they're anonymous to one another behind these very nice, colorful animal avatars, which you see there. But of course, students' identities are always visible to the teacher, ensuring that very important layer of accountability.
No, that's brilliant. Go on. Sorry, go on.
Well, to add to what Ian said as well, I think another challenge is actually once students are engaged in the discussion, trying to get them to remain on task throughout the activity. And I think that's particularly true of small group discussions where you've kind of grouped students within the class and then left them to work independently. You're trying to monitor what's going on in every group, but generally trying to keep everybody on task during that is quite challenging. And also making sure that you know that all the students are contributing equally so that everybody is achieving the learning outcome for the session. I think quite often it's the more diligent students that might take on the work of the whole group because they're the ones that are more concerned about what will happen if they don't discuss what they're supposed to be doing. And that leaves some of the others then not participating quite as they should be. And teachers already have loads of excellent classroom management strategies to address those issues. But actually, by spending time on that, what that's doing is taking them away from those more meaningful interactions. So they could actually be deepening students' comprehension, addressing misconceptions, and actually moving students forward in their learning. Now, Kialo does address that with a tasks feature. And so what we've tried to do is design something that would put the responsibility for that participation in the hands of the students and therefore free up the teachers to focus on more kind of valuable learning focused interactions. So what teachers can do is actually set students numerical success criteria for the discussion. And they can do this when they set up the discussion or at any time during it. And they assign each student a number of tasks to complete. So that could be something really basic, like adding a certain number of claims to the discussion. And as students add a claim, they will see their task update until they've achieved whatever target the teacher has set them. And because everyone contributes simultaneously, those targets can be a lot more ambitious than in a traditional discussion. So rather than just expecting everybody to contribute once or twice, teachers might ask students to contribute maybe 5 or 10 claims within the same amount of discussion time. And there are also other tasks as well that teachers can set. So it's really good in a discussion, I think, not just to have students contributing their own ideas, which they generally can be quite confident with in the right situation, but actually getting them to think about what other students are saying as well and to respond to each other. So on Kialo, you can set students a task where they have to add claims under other people's claims. So that's great for getting them to engage with other perspectives. They can get used to supporting and challenging ideas, but also having their own ideas challenged as well. And that's a really key part of critical thinking, which, as you were saying at the start of the show, is absolutely crucial in today's world. You can also ask students to add claims under their own claims. And again, what's happening there is what Ian was referring to earlier. So students are going beyond just the what and moving into the why, and they're actually starting to develop lines of reasoning as well. There are even a couple more as well. So it's great to be able to move discussions on. And one of the ways that we can do that and challenge students is by getting them to add sources to their claims. And that's something that in a traditional discussion can be quite challenging. Whereas on Kialo, what students can do is actually link a source directly to a claim. So they can make sure that the claims that they're making are actually supported by evidence. And that can generate some really valuable learning as well on misinformation, as students can practice evaluating whether sources are credible, whether they're reliable. There's even another one as well, which is to get students to vote on the impact of each other's claims. And so what that's doing is getting students to reflect on the content of the discussion. And it's great maybe as an extension or as a home learning task, a follow-up after the discussion. So actually getting them to go back over what's been said or what's been written and getting them to think about the impact of each of those claims. And that's something that would be great to do in a traditional discussion, but it's very, very hard to remember everything that's been said. Whereas on Kialo, that's something that is much easier because the whole discussion is recorded.
Can I add to that with something that for me, I find it an amazing tool, and I can tell you more about why and how I fell in love with it later. But the thing that really made me see how useful it is that one of my A-level students, when she was revising very late at night, I shouldn't have been checking my emails, but I got an email from her, Miss, can you resend me the links to all those debates we did online? Because I want to use them to revise for my A-level exam next week. And that for me just really hit me of like, if she's finding it that useful, that she wants to have that record. So it's not even just for me as a teacher to look through who did what and who said what, and I'm sort of totting up that they met all those tasks that I've set them. But the students themselves have that bank to refer to and go back to. And students that haven't been in the lesson can also see the things that we talked about. Because I think that tangible evidence of discussions is just really hard sort of logistically to get. And of course, I love classroom discussions in the classroom where we're all there speaking to each other. But then how do you have that recorded for the students later? You know, how can you actually record each claim that was made and sort of go back 5 people to add something or challenge something? And so that's something that I've really loved about Kialo, is having that record. I mean, I've tried other ways, like in discussions. I was doing some research once for a project, and I literally recorded a whole group discussion and sat and transcribed it and totted up who said what and how many. But teachers can't do that for discussions every time. And here's a free tool that sort of does it really simply, really easily, that the students themselves find really helpful as a record. And I love the sunburst as a record of the debate, because for me, teaching things like philosophy can seem so abstract, although actually it's about the real world, but it can seem very abstract and very kind of out there and hard for us to get our heads around. And for them to see that debate like that, I mean, I just think it's fantastic. I've used Lego before and things like that to have a debate where they've all put a piece in, and I've always tried to find ways of showing it. But anyway, yes, sorry, Tom. Yeah.
In the classroom, just sort of looking at this. So I'm thinking about tomorrow. You know, I've got history. We're looking at Oliver Cromwell, and obviously that's the classic sort of old school hero-villain debate. And I mean, there's lots more to it than that. That would be very, very sort of black and white. But equally, you know, there are plentiful uses for this. But I'm thinking tomorrow. You know, let's say I've got this lesson with Year 8 tomorrow, Cromwell, and I want to experiment using this. So let's imagine I've got one-to-one devices, which I'm lucky enough to have, not my class, but the school has. So I can get one-to-one devices. Would you sort of, so let's imagine I wasn't using Kialo and I was having a discussion in class. It would be, and they had the one-to-one devices in front of them. It could be that they use the one-to-one devices to find information, or they could use the one-to-one devices to perhaps write something to prepare for the debate or the conversation that is going to take place, or they could have notes, they could have a fact file on there, or whatever. But that's really the limit to where they'd use those one-to-one devices, because the classroom discussion part is obviously going to take place with me, maybe with the other students as well. It might be a debate, whatever. So if they've got Kialo in front of them, can you talk me through? Would I sort of unleash them? Because I've used this myself. It's fantastic. But would I just sort of set the stage and then unleash them to it and say, right, you go ahead for the next 45 minutes and develop this argument, or would you structure it much more than that? I'm wondering whether anybody wants to jump in on that.
For me, I can say from the different settings I've used it in, that for me, with some students, yes, I might set them off, maybe those A-level students, if we've worked hard on a topic and then they want to crack on and do it, that's fine. But I found much more effective is using it like a classroom discussion would, as a tool where I would have on the board the debate that's happening and have the points. Then I might model quite loudly and sort of obviously, oh, that's an interesting point. I wonder what I might say against that. Oh, I think this is a good point, and kind of model a few. And then they would see it and see it happening. And as the debate's going on, I might sort of pause class. Okay, everybody, let's pause and look at this discussion that's happening here. Because that starburst, one of the most beautiful things is when you see it in real time pinging out like this. And you just go, hang on, who are these two debating here? And it might be two students who've never spoken to each other, who've never ever spoken in a class discussion together, but they're the two that go off and have this debate that the rest of the class can see. So just like you might in a normal class discussion, it doesn't have to be that it's a separate thing that's happening on the computers over there. It's something that can be part of that classroom discussion. Yeah,
totally. The bit I wanted to get at, though, was that you can almost have a live, like you just mentioned it, Ruth, you can see that starburst like developing in front of you.
Yeah.
So it can be a live experience, almost like a live event for the students, rather than starting it off in one lesson, then coming back to it in 2 weeks, if that makes sense.
But you could say in 2 weeks' time, we'll come back and go back to that debate. Do we need to go back and add something, But for me, the beauty of it is when that starburst is moving and the students see it. And I do a lot of my work now remotely online, and I work with schools doing, one of the things I do is revision sessions with groups of students. I was doing that anyway when I was in the UK. And for then I'll have maybe 20 or 30 students on there. And then in the chat, they'll be like, wow, that's so cool. Look at that. That's my debate. And I can see how interesting they find it as a tool. And they always ask me, Miss, can we do another one of those Kialo debates, please? So that for me makes me realize how much they enjoy it and how useful it is for them in pushing their thinking. Some of them have said to me, oh, in class, I don't always get to have these debates with people, but on this site, I've managed to have my thinking pushed on so much more by students that I might never have really had those conversations with. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, I want to circle back to you for the next bit, which I wanted to ask you, sort of circling back a little bit to what we were saying at the beginning, because I think one of the biggest challenges I have is keeping everybody involved in a classroom discussion, getting all students to be able to have a say or an involvement. So how do you think not just Kialo maybe, but it's a big challenge. So how does Kialo fit into an infrastructure around trying to tackle that challenge?
Right. That is one of the big challenges in any class discussion is, making sure that everybody's participating, feels like they're involved in the conversation, because it's no fun to just sit out there on the edges the whole time. And no fun for you as a teacher either when students are talking. So what's really nice about Kialo is that, as I said before, alluded to before, everybody can talk at the same time. Contributions are simultaneous. So
I wanted to, Ian, can I just cut in? I wanted to ask you about that. What happens if they're writing something at the same time? Does that matter? What if you've got like student A over this side of the classroom, you've got student B over this side of the classroom, and they're looking at the argument? So let's imagine this one, right? Books are more in depth than movies. And one student over on the right-hand side has written a pro. One student on the other side has written a con. I guess they can both just do that at exactly the same time, right? And then it appears at the same time, and then they can add to that.
Absolutely, they can.
Okay.
Yes. So you could be working on two completely different aspects of this conversation at once, if you will. If there's a student who's
Yeah.
really interested in, I don't know, if you're talking about Cromwell, somebody who's interested in sort of Cromwell's personal character, you could be having that little side discussion over here. While at the same time, some students are having another discussion about the historical context in which he's operating. And that is completely possible on Kialo. We do try to make sure that students aren't putting the same ideas within the discussion, because we do know that there is that potential to happen. There is a nifty little duplicate checker. As you're writing a claim on Kialo, Kialo will let you know if somebody has used similar language or words in another claim in the discussion, so that you can check your writing, your thoughts against that, and hopefully not duplicate what somebody has already said.
No, that's brilliant. That makes perfect sense. So coming. Sorry, that was me going off on a tangent, but I thought that was an important point. But the what I'm interested in, that inclusivity wise, in terms of involving everybody. I mean, obviously they can all. I mean, do you think this helps the students? I mean, I've not. Ruth will have seen this in action. I've not seen it in action. I've used it, but not in action. So Ruth, does this encourage participation on that level?
Yeah, and I think something we haven't said, I mean, we've alluded to it, is the idea of differentiation, and how actually, I've said this about some of the students feeling like they're being pushed when they might not, well, they are pushed in the classroom, but you know what I mean, the ones that really thrive when they're like up against someone else who's also, as maybe gifted and talented as them. But also, I think differentiation for all students. So those ones that you said might be hesitant to join in, they've said to me, I really enjoy actually watching someone else type something first, and then I can comment afterwards. Or even just the students who do the voting. Some students I've said, look, maybe we're doing a topic today that, because I do a lot of revision classes with students who feel a bit out of their depth sometimes with some of the content. I've said, even if you don't feel you can contribute, just wait and then decide how you're going to vote. And then they always still get involved and do the voting, because they can see those ideas that are, put forward by the other students. They can kind of understand them and start to vote. So I think it encourages them so much more to contribute, which is fantastic. And whilst, I mean, I love class discussions, it's my bread and butter as a teacher, but the students in my classes do sit a written exam at the end of their course for religious studies, for example. We can have all the class discussions that we want to have. It's amazing, but their exam is going to be something written. So I think being able to see these things being written out by each other can really help with that differentiation, for them to see how they can maybe frame their views. And sometimes it's not their view that I'm asking them to write. I'm asking them to write a completely different view and give a reason for it. And then they can do a counter to that as well. So I think differentiation, it's a really good tool for differentiation as well.
Nice, brilliant. Louise, talking of sort of, how this translates into the classroom, when it comes to classroom management, managing a discussion is definitely one of the tougher parts of the job. I mean, I'm into year 19, 18. It's still with a big class. It is one of the tougher parts of the job. Now, during the lockdown, when I was teaching online, using tools like Mentimeter and even just the chat feature in Teams, right, or whatever, it was much easier. I'll be honest, because you don't have now. I quite like this idea of Kialo being in the classroom, or tools like Kialo being in the classroom, because it almost gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you all the students there, but they can type stuff instead of feeling the need to shout stuff. So suddenly maybe you can take a certain element out. Now, obviously, there's still going to be opportunities for the students to talk, because I wanted to touch on that as well, is how oracy is just incredibly important anyway. But it's taken on an even bigger sort of sense, especially in the UK of late. So I was going to touch on that later, in terms of that blend between students who might not normally contribute to a classroom discussion actually being able to contribute and think about it, but also not taking away the element of them actually speaking, and how you would incorporate that. I mean, seems very straightforward because they've written it and they may just read out what they've written, right? That is probably it in the simplest form. But I wanted to ask you more first around, you know, how it would help students to maybe stay on task, or how are there any tools in there that can help with that?
Yes. So as we were discussing earlier, we've got our tasks feature. So that's where the teacher can assign numerical success criteria into the discussion. So I won't go through all the different tasks again, but it's really, really handy because what it's doing is kind of giving that responsibility over to the students.
Is that this one? Is that this part?
Absolutely right. So you can see there that we've got the different categories of task, and the teacher can adjust those to suit the level of their class. You could even, if you've got your students working in different groups, as Ruth was saying about differentiation, you could actually give each group a different number of tasks as well, and do your differentiate in that way. So we've got that feature. And like I said, what that's doing is giving the ownership of the discussion really much more over to the students. I think quite often in a traditional discussion, it's the teacher that's at the center of the discussion. So the student will give a response, but that response will go to the teacher, and it's almost filtered through the teacher, and then the teacher asks another student to respond, and it's almost like they're looking for the right answer and for the teacher's approval. Whereas on Kialo, you could actually have a discussion where it's just the students completely, and the teacher doesn't need to contribute at all. There's that level of flexibility. It's the students interacting with each other, but at the same time, we do have the features there where the teacher can take as much control or as little control as is needed. So, for example, it is possible to use a grading and feedback tool on Kialo as well. So if you think about a traditional discussion, you've got students giving their contributions, and the teacher would be perhaps feeding back one at a time in front of the whole class. That's quite a time-consuming task, really, and it's quite hard to give meaningful feedback. But what teachers can do on Kialo is, with every claim that's submitted, if they wish to, they can grade it using a numbered scale. And then they can also add some written feedback as well. And they can do that on as many or as few claims as they wish. So as they're going through the discussion, they might spot some particularly strong claims that they want to give some positive feedback on. But more likely, they'll spot something that needs a little bit of constructive criticism to move that learning forward, perhaps address a misconception, something that might need supporting with a source. And that feedback will go instantly to the student. So that means students can address the feedback immediately, and therefore they're going to make progress within that session. So it's almost like a continuous cycle of formative assessment. But it is really important to say at the same time that those features are completely optional. So it's perfectly possible just to have students go straight into the discussion without any setup needed, without even creating an account, and just get students talking if that's the purpose of the session. But equally, if we've got some very strict learning outcomes that we want to meet in that session, teachers can tailor the discussion to suit the needs of the lesson.
Yeah, I was going to ask about this part in terms of when the students are sort of, I guess, giving feedback on a claim. I was going to use the term challenging a claim, but giving feedback on a claim, saying, and let's say it was critical feedback, as in, this needs backing up or supporting or a source on it, a reference point on it, or maybe it's whatever. Is there any way, and this more dwells into just teaching in general, is there any way that you sort of encourage perhaps higher level responses there? Because I guess, there will be teachers out there saying, right, I'm just going to get a student going, I really want to challenge this claim. I don't know what it means, but I'm just going to write something on it saying, I challenge this claim, it's garbage or something, that's more about the teacher, I appreciate, and how they structure that task and how they set it up. But I mean, that's not necessarily to do with Kialo itself, but I'm wondering, I guess one of the intrinsic features is it allows them time to think. I suppose I would say that's a really positive thing with it, rather than it being a free-flowing classroom discussion where everybody's talking and someone might not get the chance to actually think about what they're saying. But I wondered whether you had any thoughts on that point.
I think the key thing is to make sure that as with any session, you have got your clear learning objective and success criteria in place before the session. And so any feedback that you are giving students is directly related to that. And they already know before they start what the expectation is. They already know what makes a good claim in this particular context. And so it's very, very easy then to make sure that your feedback is directly related to those success criteria. It's not personal, as in the students' ideas. It's about how to write the claim, or it's about how to find a credible source, for example.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
I was just going, and I've used it in that it's always the pros and the cons. So they're always thinking of what's the strength or weakness, or what could I say against or encounter. So that frames it rather than just, what do you like about this? Or, kind of sometimes we can say that in a discussion, does anyone not think? And it's sort of, this really does frame it as that kind of critical thinking that you set up before you do it with the students. But I've just found much more than some classroom discussions where it can get a bit personal or, get off the topic. This kind of helps them remain in that sort of critical thinking mode. And they're not feeding back like on the point. They're just seeing the strength of the point or not, and how would they counter it if they don't think it's a strong point.
That makes perfect sense. No, brilliant. Yeah. In terms of the source, the source bit, I love the source bit. I think the source bit is just a great little tool, and it may seem simplistic, but students might not know what referencing is. They might not know. A lot of them at the lower end might not know what a source is, right? So I think that's a really handy. I don't know whether someone wants to dig into that a little bit more, the adding a source, but I know we've very briefly touched on it earlier, but we've got the sort of screen grab here of what it actually looks like. But
I haven't I haven't used that yet. My kids just put a source in, but this is brilliant. The thing I love about Kialo also is that it's constantly evolving. And so every time I log onto it, there's like a new feature and a new thing, and it's just amazing. And when I've spoken to Kialo about things where, for example, my students at the very beginning were finding it not hard, but like having to like make an account, and then I put them in a group and I gave them the link, and I said to Kialo, can you make it instant access? And they were like, hey, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's do it. And they just made my life so much easier. And so constantly there's things appearing, and this just looks like it's going to be amazing, because for us, it's the same thing. Our students, they need to use sources, and they need to cite where the sources are from. And that's the thing that they sometimes struggle with. To make that explicit is really good. Yes, we'll definitely be using that.
We'll say the source feature is one of my favorite parts of Kialo, because it's really asking your students, and why do you think what you think? But also going even one step further about showing those receipts, right? What is the actual factual validity or the evidential basis for what you think as well? And that is such an important part of any kind of good faith, sound, logical discussion as well, isn't it? Because we can have a very logically structured discussion on, I don't know, about Middle Earth, which doesn't exist, right? But if you're asking your students to really found what they think in evidence, then you're going that extra step to really have them reflect on the real world. And I love that little quote note feature too, because that makes my life so much easier as a teacher, where students can say exactly what part of a source is supporting their argument by choosing a quote from that source, or just explaining briefly, like, this source says this.
I mean, it's a little bit like, I guess, a lot of social media platforms now are moving towards, community note features and, being able to fact check other people's comments from a community point of view. I guess there's similarities here, maybe not quite as intuitive of that in the sense like it'd be a massive upvote or downvote, but there are similarities in the sense of a community moderating the content and the knowledge and the actual opinions that people are writing, to back them up. I think it's incredibly important in the age of misinformation, if you like, that even if students aren't able to produce a source that is sort of viable, at least by the process of them trying to find something or whatever, I think that's really good. And, and also, I mean, how would, Louise, I'll ask you this, or anybody actually, but how would a teacher check once they've inputted the sources, and and they've referenced like what we can see on screen at the moment, does the teacher then check that, or how could that then just be used? Does that show up on the big diagram? How's that then used later on?
Yeah, so what Kialo does is collates all of those sources that have been used in the discussion, and they all appear in a sidebar, and they're listed alphabetically, and anyone who's in the discussion can see that list of sources. So it means that teachers can go in and check that the students are using credible, reliable sources. Students can check each other's sources. As you've just been saying, you talked about kind of upvotes and things like that. I mean, students could actually be going through the claims and using the voting feature to vote on the sources within the discussion. That's another option. There's a lot of flexibility. It's also great if students are using Kialo as an essay plan, which is another possible use case. So they can, if they're using it individually, they can set out all their ideas, they can add their sources, and the sources are then listed for them. So it's a little bit easier for them to transfer them onto their reference list for their essay.
I actually wanted to ask you, Louise, as well about the written element to it. Rather than an oral discussion, having that written discussion, there's probably advantages to that, isn't there, that we haven't really sort of gone into yet. But what would you see as the strengths of this approach versus like just an oral discussion in class?
So I think we've covered quite a lot of different elements in terms of kind of the participation, the fact that it can be completely anonymous, so that students can contribute honestly without feeling that they're personally being judged. But there's also the fact that students can practice breaking down an argument into individual claims, so they can break down those lines of reasoning into manageable chunks, and almost giving them that practice of deconstructing their reasoning. It then sets them up for reconstructing it, if you like, within a longer piece of writing. So by giving them the ability to deconstruct their ideas, that then helps them to build ideas more clearly afterwards.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Ian, I mean, in terms of, we've touched on this, but critical thinking skills. I mean, this has been a much debated moniker in the UK anyway, in terms of, can you teach it? How do you teach it? What is it, right? But I mean, why do you think critical thinking is so important for students today? And how can Kialo sort of help with that as well in the classroom and beyond?
Right. Well, Kialo's focus on critical thinking, I will say, is one of the main reasons why I wanted a job with this company to begin with. When I pivoted out of teaching, I wanted some place to apply the skills in a way that I thought was really meaningful for the world. And critical thinking is now just as important as it's ever been, because we want our students to not just be recipients of information. We want citizens who can interpret and apply knowledge across all kinds of different subject areas, right? It's really important because students, through learning critical thinking skills, become better communicators. They're able to weigh up different arguments from different perspectives. They're able to recognize their own cognitive biases and, really self-reflect, have that kind of metacognition as well, which is very important, for kind of checking yourself once in a while, not just in academic conversations, but in your personal life too, right? And it really is great because it has those real world skills of problem solving and decision making that students can apply to all different areas of their life. And if I can get on my soapbox for just one moment here, of course, it really does speak to the moment as well, because of exactly what you referenced earlier, Tom. We are in an age right now where all the 21st century skills and challenges that we try to prepare our students for, one of the big ones that's right in front of our faces right now is misinformation. You go log on to any social media platform, and unless you are very diligent about curating, what you're seeing, it's liable that you're going to get at least a little bit of spray of that fire hose of misinformation that is just out there these days. So we really want students who are able to identify and evaluate credible sources, people who have just, at least enough of a mental barrier, if you will, sort of a psychic barrier to that kind of misinformation, where they can spot claims that sound suspicious, or maintain that kind of skepticism, to not just immediately gobble up anything that you see just because it already confirms your worldview. So we really want our students to be on guard as much as possible going forward, so that they can make better decisions both in their own lives and better decisions as citizens that affect all of our collective well-being.
I think it's important. I mean, even a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, I was having a debate on a particular social media site, Facebook. It was actually. Let's just say it. And it was on my personal Facebook, so it wasn't a public sort of debate. But it was interesting because the way the debate went, and this is where a tool like this, I think, is genuinely important. Whether you sort of to the level you want to buy in is obviously up to an individual, and a teacher will work out how best to use something to one degree or another. Every teacher needs to make their own decisions on that. But in terms of tools like this that help to understand argument and understand debate and understand what is a source, what does it mean when you say you've proven something, what does that look like, what's I mean, obviously another element that you'd move on to, I can see the uses for this already, but when people are putting in the sources, what are the sources you're using? What is a reputable source? What is an opinion and what is a fact? In this particular argument I was having, the person was referring to links, but they were links to the opinions of other people. So they weren't like, it was like, I've proven this because this guy on a random YouTube channel said this. Well, that's a source, but it might not be it's an opinion, someone else's opinion that you're using to back up your opinion, rather than a fact to back up your opinion, right? So I think there's so much. I was thinking about this in the context of this conversation leading up to it, obviously exploring Kialo myself, and thinking how the complexity of conversation that's happening now because of social media, the difficulty that, I mean, this was an adult to adult conversation, but thinking about kids and the challenges they're going to have, and how can they see the wood from the trees? How can they see and understand that? And maybe something visual like this can help them to do that. Maybe the structure of it can help them to understand how arguments can work. Ruth, I wanted to ask you, in the classroom, now obviously it's an online classroom, but how have you seen the students use it? You're obviously here as a guest of Kialo, so you must have had a positive experience with it, but I want you to really give us how you've used it in practical terms and the results that you've seen.
Well, yeah, so to begin, just what you were saying there about misinformation is so powerful for us in religious studies and philosophy, where there's so many misconceptions that can be really embedded from exactly what you were saying about different sources of information. So I first discovered Kialo during lockdown, when I was searching for I typed in, how can I do a debate online at the same time with all these kids online? Because that was the thing I was really, really missing during lockdown teaching. I loved getting into all the tech and Mentimeter and, all the chat functions and Google Polls and everything, but I needed something. I was trying Google Docs where they were writing comments, and I was just like, surely there's something that can bring all of that together and make it still happen. And then I saw, it just took me to the Kialo website, and I was like, yes, this is amazing, and just went for it. And then my students, I kind of just worked it out as I went along. I didn't even have time to go. You know what it was like, I don't know, during those lockdown days where you were up mega late planning for the next day. I had a toddler shutting my laptop every time I was in a lesson, all that kind of stuff. And I was learning as I went along with it how to work it and how the students could. Started with my A-level students, because for them we'd already had we do a lot of debates and a lot of discussions, a lot of what we said about essay planning here. So I started with them, and it worked super well with them. And like I said, they asked me for the links and they wanted to have copies of the debates. And then I thought I'd try it out with my GCSE classes. And again, they just took to it. They absolutely loved it, because they could have those discussions that they'd been missing. But then when we went back to in-classroom teaching as well, I used it still because I still loved it as a platform for all the things that we've said about all the students being able to contribute at the same time, not having to wait their turn. It's that worst thing when there's a student that's desperate, wants to speak, and then when you get to them, they go, oh, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. And you just think, oh no, I bet it was brilliant, and this was just a way to manage that. I took them all, we don't have one-to-one devices in the school I'm in Tower Hamlets, but I just booked out a computer room, took the kids in there and then showed them how to use it, circulating the room, seeing what they were doing, helping some students out if they needed it. And I've also done remote sessions where students are on phones and I'm down the computer screen and they're joining in that way. But the main way I use it at the moment is in revision sessions. And so for me, I would love to set up the Kialo beforehand and have it all kind of planned out. But actually what I found really useful is if I do revision with the students and there's a particular essay question or topic that they really want to delve into, they tell me which one and then I set it up. And it's so quick, I promise you, literally between them saying, oh, Miss, can we do that question? I'll just type it in and it's there. I think a lot of us had that kind of tech fatigue by the end of lockdown. I don't know if people have suffered that, where it's like, oh, it's another thing. It's another one. I just can't cope with another techie thing. And I just want to say that for me, Kialo, I didn't have any time or energy to put into a new thing, and it just came up and it works really intuitively for me anyway. And then we just join in with that debate. And also what I like is you can have, because for me in religious studies, we have a lot of questions about whether this or this is more important. It's not always that kind of sort of dichotomy between two views. It can be a range of views that we're trying to encourage our students to think of and not always polarizing. And so there's that function as well with Kialo where I might put 4 or 5 claims that they can start to debate under. So it's very sort of flexible for different settings. And like I said earlier, the fact that my students ask me for it afterwards, like months later, where's that debate we did about whether God exists or not? And I can find it for them. It's it's really super helpful. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you that, Rich, in terms of like the use of the diagram after it's finished. I mean, how do you use it? Do you refer back to it on screen? Do you say, let's have a look back at it?
So I might pause what we're doing in the discussion and say, right, everyone, come back to the main screen because they might be on their computer looking here. And I say, come back to my Google Meet screen. And then I'll just like scroll my cursor over it and show them where the different arguments are and where they're coming. And then as everyone's voting, we then turn back and look at it and see, because they go darker the higher the votes are. So you can see which claims it is. And then I'll say, okay, let's have a look at what was happening here then. Why did everyone like this one so much? We'll look at it and then I'll pose the question and we can discuss what was it that was particularly strong about that claim that people liked. And then I can print off the starburst to have it on my wall so that then we can refer back to it as a kind of reminder. Oh, do you remember that discussion that we had? And then there was us two that had that little debate that went off in the corner,
What's the difference between the colours on the map? The red and the blue and the light green and the orange.
Well, I think I know, but I might get it wrong.
Ian knows.
So the blue circle that you see there in the center, that represents the central thesis or that proposition. So in this case, books are more in-depth than movies. That's that blue circle. And each green wedge that you see is a pro claim, while each red, orange wedge that you see is a con claim. So you can see how all those are branching out. And the different shades correspond to Kialo's voting feature, where students can go on each claim and rate what they believe to be that claim's impact or the strength of that argument, if you will. So claims that students have voted more highly, that they think are really good arguments, are going to show up as a darker color, while claims that aren't voted as highly are going to have a lighter color. And that's really neat. If you would like to, as Ruth has been talking about, go through a discussion at the very end. You throw that sunburst up on the board, and you can, click on each of these darker colored wedges, which are the good arguments, and go through and ask students, okay, well, why do we think this is such a good argument? And so you can have a really nice follow-up activity to your Kialo discussion that way.
And is there any sort of rhyme or reason in terms of where those are situated on the map? Or is that just fluke where they are on that map?
Not at all fluke, no. Very, very intentional.
Nothing is a fluke with Kialo. Nothing's a fluke.
Yeah, right. That's all. It is all very purpose, very focused. That's our whole.
I was just checking. Yeah.
So it's where you see those pros and cons displayed in that visual map is where you would see them in that chain of argumentation. So you will see the green and red wedges that are attached to the thesis are responding to the thesis. If you see a green wedge that is attached to a green wedge, then it's a supporting argument for a supporting argument. Bringing that into another level of detail and depth. And wherever you see a red wedge, somebody has decided to challenge whatever bit of reasoning lies above.
Got you. Perfect. Okay. No, that's brilliant. And so, Ruth, just going back to you for a minute. Because what I'm thinking about is the different age group of students who might use this, right?
Yeah.
So what's your experience with like Key Stage 3?
Yeah,
or even younger, all the way up to like A level. What's your experience of the different key stages using it?
So I've used it from year 7 all the way up to year 13.
American viewers.
Oh yeah.
Ian, translate this. Is it K-12?
11 to 18, 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 11 to 18-year-olds. Well, here it's college and lycée. Anyway, yeah, that age group, 11 to 18, is the age that I've used it with. Obviously, because I work now doing a lot of revision, it's with older students because they're preparing for the exams. But when I was in the classroom, when I was remote teaching, I was using it with year 7s as well, all the way up. And it's maybe the arguments are less, it's dependent on the content that we're doing, so it depends on what topics we're looking at, but maybe the arguments, you say that, but some of the most amazing discussions in philosophy you have are with the younger students, so they could be very, very thoughtful and very thought-provoking, but may not be as sophisticated as sort of written in the same way as the older students. But I haven't noticed that it's more or less accessible for either sets, really. It's just been something that whichever class or group you have, run with it as far as they do as a group. Basically, is the amount of time that I have with them, is the amount of time I can give to it. You could just keep, it's not one of those things that sort of like runs out and then you're like, oh, okay, that finished a bit quicker than I was expecting it to. Like some class discussions, if there's like that eerie silence and everyone said everything. No, there's something about it that just helps it keep going and helps them keep contributing. Yeah, and then you can come back. Even on Saturday, I was doing a session and I just sort of said something while we were doing it. And then I noticed one kid had like gone back and slightly changed his claim, which was great for me because he'd like heard what we were talking about and he'd gone, oh, actually, and it was like, so-and-so's just changed his claim. And I got a little email about it. And I thought, that's just brilliant, isn't it? To see that real time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wanted to ask Louise next, or as we sort of come towards the end of this wonderful conversation. Obviously, a big perk of this is you can get it for nothing, right? So any teacher can currently use this for free. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and not just the word currently either in there, because it's free forever and all the different features are free. So once teachers do start using it, they don't need to worry that we're suddenly going to start charging for it. And it is so easy to get started. So it's a case of simply signing up and you can start using the platform immediately. And one of the things that we recommend teachers doing is heading straight to our topic library, just to give them a bit of a taster really of what Kialo can offer. So in the topic library, we've got 600 discussion ideas, and they are searchable by age and by curriculum subject as well. And each one of those comes ready-made with some starter claims, which help to prompt students' ideas. So I know if students are faced with just a blank piece of paper or a blank screen, or if you just throw the question out there in a traditional discussion, very often you can be met with silence. So we've put 2 pros and 2 cons into the discussion. So that just helps to prompt students' ideas, but also shows them straight away that there are different perspectives on whatever issue it is that you're discussing. So that's a really great go-to resource for lesson planning. But teachers can also create their own discussion as well. And it's really, really easy to do that. There's just a button to click Add New, and then it takes you to a discussion wizard. You put in the information that you want to include, and you can start that discussion straight away. And I think because teachers can create their own discussion, it means that any teacher of any subject can use Kialo. And those Kialo discussions can very quickly become a regular lesson activity then, across the curriculum, really. So they're another really useful tool to have in a teacher's resource bank. So, one day we might be doing a written activity, One day we might be doing something online. One day we'll be doing a Kialo discussion. It's something that's really, really helpful to have. And I think it's also worth pointing out that with a traditional discussion, it can be really, really hard to evidence what you've done. And I think as a result, quite often discussions might be used as an introductory activity or a reflection activity, but they're very rarely the main part of the lesson. Because of that need to evidence, you might need to show what you've done in that lesson to a member of the SLT, for example, or perhaps another visitor that comes into school. And it can be really, really hard to do that with a discussion. Whereas on Kialo, it's very simple just to print out a QR code for the discussion that you've been working in and get that in students' books. And then anybody who wants to see what you've been doing in that session can simply, scan the QR code and they can see all of the discussion. And so what it does is change that discussion from an introduction or a reflection into the main activity for that lesson. And it's great for teachers to have that variety and different ways to keep pupils engaged.
That's fantastic. So any teacher who fancies having a go with this, I'm going to be having a go with it hopefully tomorrow. Certainly either tomorrow or Thursday on Cromwell. So I'll let you know how that goes. But if they want to, you can visit kialo-edu.com. It takes about 1 minute to sign up for free, and then you can get started on there, set up a discussion point, and then let it roll out and see how the students get on with it. How do the students sign up, by the way, for it? Do they sign up through, do they just log in through email accounts, or is it open access? How does that work?
There's a few different ways, and you can choose the way that's best for you. The simplest way is just to use what we call an instant access discussion. You create your discussion, you turn on instant access, and then you can give your students either a link or a QR code, and they'll pop right into the discussion. They'll just put in their name, good to go. If you would like students to have accounts that you can track and whatnot, we do integrate with all of the major learning management systems out there. So if you were to put in Kialo and say your Google Classroom, your Moodle instance, Canvas instance, then what we'll do is automatically create accounts for your students on our back end based on whatever student information is in the LMS. So they'll just be good to go.
Perfect. Brilliant.
They can also set up with email addresses. Can they still do that? So I should know this. They could set up their own account with an email address, couldn't they? Yeah.
They sure can, yes.
That instant sharing access link was just, I was like, I already love Kialo, but this has just made my life 10 times easier. It's so good. Yeah, really good. They could just come and jump in and have a go straight away.
Share it in Google Classroom, yeah. No, it's brilliant. Fantastic. Listen, guys, it was absolutely brilliant this evening. Really, really enjoyed that chat. So much to think about, not just how to integrate Kialo, but also just in general about classroom discussions and how they work and how they fit together, how we can enhance them, how we can make them better. I think it's an undercooked topic in education discourse sometimes, I think. So I think it's been really, really good to give it a bit of coverage tonight. And yeah, thank you so much for giving up the time to come on this evening. It's been absolutely brilliant.
And Tom, can I just say thank you for Teacher Connect last week, that you did it remote as well, so I could join in while I was digging my potatoes in my garden. Honestly, I loved it because I could still be there listening to all the different RE talks. So thank you for doing that.
It nearly killed us, but yes, we did do it remotely. Anyway, guys, it's been a pleasure. We'll be back again on TTR tomorrow. Yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned with Kialo. Stay tuned with Teachers Talk Radio. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Good night.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo Edu, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.